The Black Ivy League is an unofficial term used to describe the nation's most prestigious HBCUs, including Hampton, Howard, Spelman, and Morehouse, just to name a few. But with that prestige comes a unique recruiting process when it comes to the marching band.
How hard is it to recruit, obviously, at schools like we said, or what you would call the Ivy League
Mhm.
HBCUs? Can you talk about that from a band director standpoint?
Yeah. So the Ivy League of HBCUs tends to get that distinction colloquially because the schools tend to have extremely high academic standards, and and so as a result, they tend to be very selective. For example, Hampton, the school just reported about close to 19,000 applications, but only took in 1,200 freshmen. So, so just off the bat, like these schools are highly selective because they do a lot of research. They do a lot of big things in the STEM space, things in journalism. Like for example, one of our grads was the one of our journalism grads. She previously served as the president of MSNBC, Rashida Jones,
Wow.
and so people go out and do big things. They become generals, CEOs, and they tend to lift the pedigree of the university, and as such those academic standards follow those admission standards tend to follow as well. And so just from that standpoint, it's already hard to get into the school. And then of course you talk about the cost of attendance, and the whole idea about how much college should cost is a whole other topic. But Hampton being a private school, Howard being a private school, Spelman, Morehouse being private schools, they don't get funding from the state. And they get federal funding, and things allocated to HBCUs, but they're not privy to a lot of the same fundings like for us, like a Norfolk State would be, or a Virginia State. So a lot of the funding comes from private donations and just from the cost of attendance. So Hampton is about $50,000 this year. Howard is close to 60, if not more. So and that can be a huge barrier to a lot of students who do want to attend, even if they do get in.
So my next question is, if the school is only bringing in 1,200, that means you only get a portion of that, correct? I mean, obviously, does that number kind of fluctuate for you?
Yeah. So it we're at a point of equilibrium now to where we know how much we need to recruit and how many students we can afford to bring in, because operating costs and all that stuff, we don't want to over recruit. But we've gotten it to a good point where we got a system in place. So for example, this year we recruited 93 freshmen into the band. And of those, 61 of them are instrumentalists. Now that came as a result of, old school hitting the ground, traveling. I would travel all up and down the country, and visit high schools, speak to the students in person, talk to their parents, talk to their band directors, do my whole sales pitch. So for me, recruiting isn't as simple as let me sit back and wait and see what we got this year. It was an active, process to where if I didn't do that, we would only get maybe 20 or 30 recruits,
Wow.
freshmen in the band, if that, because, it's not just meeting the student and convincing them why they should, pay $50,000 a year, but it's also finding the ones that have the high test scores, the high grades, and the desire to want to major in something, that they're going to actually put the work into. So we have to recruit a specific type of student. Like, a lot of great schools out there, they're able to recruit band heads, for example.
Mm,
Now we all know that band heads, there has to be a balance between being a band head and going to class.
right.
And a lot of you find that a lot of the real the real heavy hitters in the bandhead world, they might not be doing it in the classroom. Or the ones that do it well in the classroom, they might not be bandheads. So I have to recruit that specific type of student who is part of that bandhead culture, but can also make sure that they go to class, make sure that they do the right thing. But for by and large, most of the Ivy League HBCUs, they don't get that combination. It's usually just the student who's good in the classroom and only sees band as secondary. Okay, I'm going to join band because they'll give me an extra $5,000 or whatever, But even then, now on the back end, you have to contend with that because now, it's not just me giving that band scholarship. They have an academic scholarship as well. So I can't say, okay, well, we're going to practice all these hours and then they miss class or they miss an exam or whatever, and they lose that scholarship. Now, losing out on 10, 15, 20, $25,000 is a pretty much a death sentence to their financial aid bill. So if they lose that, then they're not going to come back. If they lose my band scholarship, they're not going to come back. So a lot of students that come to these Ivy League of HBCUs, they tend to favor the academic side because historically a lot of those bands have not had the scholarship budgets in order to compete. Because maybe a $500,000 scholarship at a state school will travel far.
Right.
But $500,000 at a private school, we're talking if you give an average of $10,000, you're only getting 50 students, and then if you double that and have an average of $5,000 per student, not many students are going to take that deal on there because you have your bigger schools, your bigger bands that are able to offer more bang for their buck. So a lot of schools, like these great schools down south, especially your Jackson, your Southern, A&M, Alabama State, Miles, those schools are able to offer um, a better financial aid package to where that student is probably going to school for free. So now it's not just the student I have to deal with. I have to deal with the parent. I have to say, mom and dad, yeah, they got offered a full ride here, but this is why they should probably take out a loan to come to Hampton, if they really want to. So I have to make the program more attractive so that the student would come here even if they didn't have a band scholarship. And that's really hard to do because, like I said, there's the full ride offered out. Student with 1,000 on their SAT won't get any academic money at Hampton, but they might get half their tuition paid at a state school. And they get 1,100 on their SAT. Hampton's only going to give them 5,000 a year, whereas at another school that might be full tuition.
Wow.
So so it gets really competitive, and it's hard for these schools to be competitive in that space, just in terms of the financial aid picture.
So this next question is a little bit different. We're working on a story. We made a post last week and someone commented under that maybe mass band culture is a reason why we're seeing large numbers of enrollment when it comes to HBCU, like, marching band. Some bands are definitely noticeably bigger than they were last year. And we just wanted to hear from your perspective as an HBCU band director. Do you think mass band culture is contributing to the amount of numbers we're seeing in HBCU marching bands today?
Of course, because that's kind of where I got my start, not in a mass band, but in a community band, working with the Brooklyn Steppers marching band. We were in Brooklyn. There were no marching bands out there, and we were basically taking kids off the street and putting a horn in their hands and giving them a reason to want to finish high school, giving them a reason to believe in themselves, to say, hey, I guess I am college material, because at least in Brooklyn, these kids were being told, oh no, you college isn't for you. You got to go to a trade school. You got to just go into the workforce. Yeah, so mass band, just from a cultural perspective, has a huge benefit because now you're taking students who would otherwise have nothing to do over the summer. And a side note, this is what I'm researching in some of my postdoctoral research, because in the summer, all you really had was DCI and Drum Corps International, which is a great thing to participate in, but it's not as culturally relevant because some kids, your kids from the hood or your kids from who from areas that don't really know about core style bands, they might be turned off from it. And then culturally, when they get there, they still have to assimilate to that culture. And some students tend to get put off by that. And then another barrier is the cost. For me, I didn't march drum corps because of the cost. I couldn't afford it. We're talking now 12, 10, 1,000 up to 5,000, if not more, if you don't get sponsored. And you'd have to be one of the lucky ones to get sponsored. So when I was in Brooklyn, we did have two students, Ralph Nader and Alex Blake, who were sponsored to march with Blue Devils Drum Corps.
Wow.
Blue Devils is one of the elite drum corps. They had the talent, but they would never have otherwise had the opportunity. So there are these very systemic barriers to students marching in, those elite, as we want to call them, marching programs. That's not to say or diminish anything that mass band is doing. The hook and the benefit of mass band is the access. You, you have a horn. Do you have the time? Cool. I mean, and now the only thing preventing you from participating is, okay, well, maybe you have a summer job, okay, or maybe your parents, need you to do stuff around the house. But mass band works because it works around that. Okay, you in drum corps, you gotta go on tour, you gotta be with them, you gotta give up your whole summer. Mass band, students can be there full time, students can be there part time. And as long as they know the music, they're able to fit in, and that type of inclusion makes it insanely beneficial to the culture. And then now, as we start to see more and more college trained educators become part of that culture, now the students are getting musical knowledge that they wouldn't otherwise receive over the summer. They'd just be sitting at home over the summer. But now they're in mass band, now they're learning scales, they're learning phrasing, they're learning, breathing techniques, and now that's going to make them better once that fall season comes at their home school. So, access to instruments, access to just the culture.
So your Black Ivy Leagues would be your Morehouse, your Hampton, obviously, Howard Spelman. As someone that actually, marched in the HBCU band, I know how difficult it was to always have to replace people the next year. So as an HBCU band director, do you find that becoming an issue for you, where you have to steadily replace people the next following year?
So fortunately, in our band, we have really good retention. We don't have a lot of attrition because I do my best to try to make the program more leadership focused and more welcoming, so that we're not just pushing band on them. Because our students, obviously band is going to present you life lessons, but my education didn't even start in music. I had other degrees before I majored in music, so I bring that sort of aspect into the band room, and it's more so, hey, let me take these potential leaders and develop them from the time they get to campus, and make sure that by the time they graduate, whether or not they stay in the band, they will have the skills necessary to compete, in the real world. We do have instances where students have internships, so they have to report late to camp. So I have about 50 students per year that have to report late to camp. And I know that in a lot of other organizations that might not fly, but we're accommodating here because at Hampton, it's required to do an internship in your major, regardless of your major. So, being that flexible, it helps with morale and helps with, students wanting to stay in the program. And then we do a lot of big trips, so we travel, and that's a really good thing for students to look forward to. So it really starts with focusing on retention and making the students want to stay in the program. And then that other aspect, whether it's good or bad, there's that band scholarship, and they need to keep that band scholarship, because like on average, our band scholarships are $10,000 a year. My lowest scholarship is $2,000, and I do give out a couple full rides as well. So, students, there's the financial aspect where they have to make sure that they're in good standing with the band, and some of them just can't afford to quit band. So, they try to make the best of it, because if they lose their band scholarship, they're either going to have to take out, X amount of loans, or they might have to end up transferring, which is sometimes what we'll see if they lose their academic scholarship.
So, Dr. Jones, this is my last question. You know, since you all change conferences, I feel like people don't really get to see Hampton versus other HBCU bands like that. So if you could just kind of give us a glimpse of what people can expect this year, or, you know, just excite the people.
Yeah, I've talked to some directors. They want to do some gym battles, so that's gonna really bridge the gap between, we're in the CAA conference and we don't get to see many HBCUs in the latter part of our season. Our first few games are against HBCUs, but later in the year we play the PWIs, and really a lot of people don't get to see us, and it can make things a little boring around here, especially with the students and trying to keep them engaged. But with these band battles that we have coming up, potentially we have one with Norfolk State potentially, and we're talking to the A&T and see if they want to do one in November. So that keeps the spirits up. That keeps us in peak form. Going into the end of next year, I'm not even allowed to say it just yet, but we have something huge coming up, a huge performance coming up that's going to, put Hampton on the map, not just the band, but the entire university, the state of Virginia. And it's going to put us on the national and international stage. So that's, again, something for the students to look into. And then everything we talked about with retaining them, that makes them want to stick around, because we are doing big things. We get to, be seen on TV and all that stuff. So, that, and, just trying to get our name out there, get our brand out there a little more, like basically the same trajectory as we had when I was at A&T. It started with media, putting out good media, but really starting with a good product, and really letting potential students know that, hey, this is a good home for you. And for us, our hook is, we want to give you the best of both worlds, give you a good band experience and a good academic experience. And, we try to excel at both, especially the academic experience. So we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to recruit based on those aspects, and be able to bring in, especially with our, as we build our concert ensembles, our jazz ensembles even more, we're going to be able to present a well-rounded collegiate bandsman experience for our students, whether or not they are a music major. So those things are making things exciting around here, and making it to where, really a lot of people should put Hampton on their list. A lot of, rising high school seniors should really take a look at us and see what we're doing over here, because we do got something special going on over here.
I'm BJ with the HBCU Band Entertainment Network, and thank you for watching this interview right here on BJ Productions. Make sure you subscribe for more content just like this. See you soon.